You get that ink out of a cereal box, old man? The voice was young, sharp, and filled with the kind of pride that only comes from being the best and knowing it. Frank Cooper didn't look up from his coffee. He was 81 years old, and the simple act of stirring 2 cubes of sugar into the dark liquid needed more of his attention than the pair of big men standing over his booth. He could feel their presence, the sheer size of them. They were big men made from stone and confidence, wearing regular clothes that did a poor job of hiding what they did for work. The one who had spoken, a man with a hard jaw and eyes that missed nothing, leaned forward, putting his palms on the table. His knuckles had scars. "I'm talking to you." He pointed with his chin toward Frank's left arm, which rested on the worn plastic of the diner table. There, on the sun-spotted and wrinkled skin, was an old tattoo. It was a simple design, a black snake eating its own tail, and inside the circle it made, a single, plain, five-pointed star. The lines were thick, the ink blurry from many years. It looked less like a proud symbol and more like a forgotten drawing. "What about it?" Frank's voice was rough, a low rumble that seemed to take effort. He finally lifted his eyes. His eyes, pale blue and cloudy with age, held a calm stillness that seemed to worry the young soldier. The second man, quieter and with a thoughtful look, pushed his partner. "Davis, leave it alone." Davis ignored him. "I'm just curious what it's supposed to be. Some kind of biker thing? You in a club?" He smiled meanly. "What's it called? The Old Timers Club?" The diner, a cozy place called the Scrambled Egg just a few miles from Fort Liberty, had been humming with the quiet breakfast rush. Now a pocket of silence was growing from Frank's booth. The waitress Karen, a woman in her 50s with a forever tired but kind face, froze with a coffee pot in her hand. Regular customers who knew Frank, the quiet old man who came in for coffee and toast every Tuesday and Thursday, gave nervous looks at the two big men. Frank took a slow sip of his coffee. He placed the cup down with a steady hand. "It's just something from a long time ago." "A long time ago," Davis copied, pulling the words out. "You serve? What? Were you a cook? Supply guy? Maybe pushing paper in Saigon?" The rudeness was thick enough to be a real force. He was testing him, poking him, enjoying the power he thought he had. He and his partner were the tip of the spear, the most special fighting force the world had ever known. This old man was just an old thing, a piece of living history that had forgotten to fall apart. "Something like that," Frank said, his eyes moving toward the window as if the talk was already a faraway memory. This made Davis mad. He expected respect, or at least a bit of fear. He was getting nothing but calm lack of interest. "You know we don't like it when people pretend to be something they're not. It's called stolen valor. People who weren't there wearing things they didn't earn." He pointed a thick finger at the tattoo again. "That ink on your arm, I've never seen it. Not in any book, not in any unit. And trust me, I know them all." The second soldier, Martinez, finally spoke up, his voice low. "He's not claiming anything, man. We're off duty. Just let him drink his coffee." "No," Davis snapped, his focus locked on Frank. "I want to know. I want to hear the war story that goes with your cheap tattoo. What's it mean, old man?" Frank's eyes came back from the window and landed on Davis's face. It wasn't a fighting look. It was a look of deep, soul-deep tiredness, as if he were seeing not just this proud young man, but a long line of them going back through time. "It means something," Frank said, his voice barely a whisper. "To the people it's supposed to." Davis laughed, a harsh barking sound. "That's it? That's all you got?" He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a fake whisper. "I think you're full of it. I think you spent your war peeling potatoes, and you got that thing done in some back alley shop in Fayetteville to impress girls." The disrespect was a real thing now. It hung in the air, thick and sour. Karen, the waitress, placed the coffee pot down with a sharp clink. The cook in the back had stopped flipping pancakes. The quiet sound of the diner had died completely. Everyone was watching. Davis stood up straight, a look of happy satisfaction on his face. He'd won. He'd broken the old man's silence, even if he hadn't gotten the reaction he wanted. He turned to Martinez. "See? Nothing. Just another fake." As he spoke, he made his final big mistake. He reached out and carelessly tapped his finger on Frank's tattoo. The touch was light, almost casual, but for Frank, it was like a lightning strike. The smell of old coffee and bacon grease in the diner disappeared, replaced in an instant by the thick metal smell of blood and wet earth. The clatter of plates became the faraway, rhythmic whump, whump, whump of helicopter blades. He wasn't in a plastic booth anymore. He was down low in a wet, thick jungle, rain dripping from the huge leaves around him. A young man's hand, slick with mud, was on his shoulder. A whispered voice in his ear. "Stay with me, Pat. Just stay with me." He remembered the flash of a homemade needle, a sharp piece of bamboo dipped in a mix of gunpowder and ink. It was done in silence, in a hidden camp deep in a country they weren't supposed to be in. A deal made between the 5 survivors of a mission that had officially never happened. The snake eating its tail, the circle, the forever nature of their war. The star in the middle, them, the 5 points of a lonely group of stars in a blacked-out sky. It wasn't a decoration, it was a scar, it was a promise. He blinked and the jungle was gone. He was back in the diner. Davis's finger was still on his arm. Frank slowly pulled his arm back, his face unchanged, but something inside him had changed. The calm surface stayed, but underneath it, an old tide had turned. While Davis was smiling, enjoying his show for the silent diner, Karen, the waitress, was already moving. She had seen enough. Frank Cooper was more than a customer. He was a regular, a quiet, gentle soul who always asked how her grandkids were doing and left a tip that was way too much for a single cup of coffee. Seeing him treated badly by these 2 towers of pride lit a cold anger in her. She knew she couldn't face them physically, but she wasn't helpless. She slipped into the small, messy office behind the kitchen, closing the door softly. She pulled out her old flip phone, her fingers moving quickly over the worn buttons. She didn't call the police. What would they do? Ask the men to leave. This was a different kind of problem, one that needed a different kind of solution. Her cousin Rachel worked as an office helper at the JSOC command building on post. A long shot, but it was the only shot she had. Rachel answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and professional. "General Brooks's office. This is Senior Airman Johnson." "Rachel, it's Karen," she whispered, her voice tight with worry. "Listen, I don't have a lot of time. There are 2 of your guys, I think they're special forces, here at the diner, and they're picking on one of my regulars, an old man." "Karen, I'm in the middle of something," Rachel started, sounding annoyed. "If they're causing trouble, you should call the military police." "No, you don't understand," Karen pushed, her voice dropping lower. "The old man's name is Frank Cooper." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I don't know that name. Is he a retired general or something?" "I don't know what he is," Karen said, frustration creeping into her voice. "But they're making fun of a tattoo on his arm. It's a snake in a circle eating its tail with a star in the middle." The silence on the other end of the line was now total. It stretched for 3, 4, 5 seconds. When Rachel's voice came back, it was completely different. The professional tone was gone, replaced by a tight, high-pitched stress. "Say that again. Describe the tattoo again." Karen described it one more time. "And the name is Frank Cooper?" Rachel asked, her voice tight. "Yes. Now are you going to do something or not?" "Stay where you are. Don't let them leave," Rachel said. And the line went dead. Inside the big, clean headquarters of the Joint Special Operations Command, Senior Airman Rachel Johnson felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. The name and the symbol weren't in any official computer files she had access to, but she'd been working in this office for 3 years, and she had heard the whispers, the ghost stories told by old sergeants about the men who came before the official units, the men who wrote the playbook in Blood and Shadow, Project Omega. General Marcus Brooks, the 4-star commander of all of America's Special Operations Forces, was in the middle of a top-secret meeting with his top commanders. The room was soundproof, the air thick with military terms and satellite pictures. Rachel knew the rules. You do not interrupt the general during a secret meeting unless the building is on fire or World War III has started. She decided this was close enough. She walked to the heavy door, took a deep breath, and knocked. A colonel with an eagle on his collar opened it a crack, his face showing annoyance. "What is it, Airman?" "I need to speak with the general. It's urgent." "It can wait," he hissed. "Sir, with all due respect, it cannot." She pushed past him, her heart pounding against her ribs. All eyes in the room, the most dangerous and powerful military leaders in the country, turned to her. General Brooks looked up from the head of the table, his eyes like chips of stone. "Airman, this had better be the end of the world." Rachel walked straight to him, her training kicking in. She leaned down and spoke in a low, clear voice that only he could hear. "Sir, I apologize for the interruption. I just got a call from a source off post. A man named Frank Cooper is being picked on at the Scrambled Egg Diner by two active duty soldiers from the unit." The general's face didn't change. He was a man famous for staying calm. "They are questioning his service, sir," Rachel continued, her voice shaking slightly, "specifically making fun of his tattoo." She paused. "A snake in a circle with a star." The change was instant and terrifying. The mask of calmness didn't just crack, it exploded. The color drained from General Brooks's face, replaced by a dark, thunderous rage that seemed to suck the very air from the room. The other commanders pulled back, stunned. Brooks rose from his chair so quickly it made a loud scraping sound and nearly fell over. His voice when he spoke was not a shout. It was a low, deep command that cut through the silence. "Get my personal detail. Get my vehicles. Now." He looked at the other men at the table. "This meeting is over." Back in the diner, the tension had reached its breaking point. Davis, having received no good reaction from Frank, decided to make things worse. His patience was gone, replaced by a mean-spirited need to see the old man break. "All right, Grandpa, I think we've had enough of your stolen valor act," he said, his voice hard. He grabbed Frank's upper arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Let's take a little walk outside. You and me, we can talk about respect." He was threatening to physically hurt an 81-year-old man in a public diner. A collective gasp went through the room. Martinez grabbed his partner's shoulder. "Davis, no, what are you doing?" But Davis was beyond reason. He started to pull Frank from the booth. It was then that the sound reached them. It wasn't the familiar sound of police sirens. It was a deeper, more scary sound, the rumble of powerful engines moving at high speed. Heads turned toward the windows. Three black government-plated Chevrolet Suburbans had screamed into the parking lot, doing a perfect tactical formation around the diner's entrance. Before the vehicles had even come to a complete stop, doors flew open and men in sharp, crisp service dress uniforms came out. They were not soldiers in combat gear. They were the command security detail, serious-faced sergeants and master sergeants who moved with a scary, synchronized precision. They formed a border, their eyes scanning everything, their presence turning a simple diner into a high-security zone. Davis and Martinez froze. They knew the vehicles. They knew the lead NCO of the security detail. Their blood ran cold. The pride in showing off drained from Davis's face, replaced by a sickly pale confusion and the first icy feelings of pure dread. The rear door of the lead Suburban opened. Out stepped General Marcus Brooks. The 4 silver stars on his collar shined in the morning sun. He didn't look at anyone. His eyes, burning with a cold, controlled fire, were fixed on the diner's front door. He walked toward it, his detail falling in silently behind him. The bell above the diner door rang softly as the general entered. The room was so quiet that the sound was like a gunshot. He filled the doorway, his presence sucking all the air from the small space. He ignored the stunned soldiers. He ignored the staring customers. His gaze swept the room and found the man in the booth. He walked directly to Frank Cooper. He stopped, his polished black shoes inches from the table. Davis still had his hand on Frank's arm. The general's eyes flicked down to that hand, and the look in them was so poisonous that Davis pulled his hand back as if he'd been burned. Then General Brooks did something that no one in that diner could have ever predicted. He clicked his heels together, his back perfectly straight. In the greasy spoon diner, surrounded by the smell of bacon and coffee, the highest-ranking special operator in the United States military snapped to the sharpest, most deep position of attention and gave a perfect, textbook salute to the frail, quiet old man in the booth. Time seemed to stop. After a long moment, the general lowered his hand. His voice, when he spoke, was thick with an emotion no one had ever heard from him before. "Frank, it's been too long." Frank looked up at him, and a faint, sad smile touched his lips. Marcus, you got old. General Brooks allowed himself a small, grim smile. He then turned his attention to the two soldiers, who looked as if they were about to be physically ill. His eyes were like ice. You, he said to Davis, you questioned this man. You questioned his tattoo. Davis could only manage a choked, stammering sound. The general didn't wait for an answer. With slow, careful movements, he unbuttoned the cuff of his right sleeve. He rolled it up his arm, past the wrist, past a thick, expensive watch. And there on the skin of the four-star general was the exact same tattoo, the snake eating its own tail, the five-pointed star. His was newer, the lines sharper, but it was an identical match to the faded ink on Frank Cooper's arm. A wave of shock rippled through the diner. Let me tell you who you were speaking to, the general said, his voice low and dangerous, yet loud enough for everyone to hear. This is Frank Cooper. Before there was a SEAL Team 6, before there was a Delta Force, there was a handful of men sent into the dark to do the impossible. They were called Project Omega. They were ghosts. Their missions were never written down. Their names were never spoken. This man and four others were the founding members of the very tradition you think you represent. He took a step closer to Davis and Martinez, his voice dropping even further. In 1968, on a mission so secret it still blacked out in every file, his team was caught deep inside Laos. They were hunted for 3 weeks by 3 entire battalions. Frank Cooper carried a wounded teammate, me when I was a young lieutenant, on his back for the last 2 days through swamps and enemy patrols to get to the pickup point. Of the 5 men who wore this mark, only 2 are alive today. You are looking at both of them. He let that sink in. The weight of his words settled over the room, crushing Davis and Martinez beneath them. The customers stared, their mouths hanging open, looking at the quiet old man in the booth with a completely new understanding. They were in the presence of a legend they never knew existed. The general turned back to his soldiers. The scolding, when it came, was not loud. It was a quiet, surgical destruction. You wear the uniform of the quiet professional. That is our creed. Today you forgot the quiet part. You forgot the professional part. You forgot that every single thing you have, every piece of gear you use, every tactic you employ, was paid for in blood by men like him. You forgot to respect your elders. You forgot everything. He looked them up and down with utter contempt. My office, 5 a.m. tomorrow. Be prepared to turn in your credentials. He had just ended their careers in the elite tiers. As the 2 young men stood there, broken and humiliated, Frank Cooper finally spoke. He pushed himself slowly out of the booth, standing on unsteady legs. He looked not at the general, but at the pale, shattered faces of Davis and Martinez. His voice was soft, with no anger or triumph. The tattoo doesn't make the man, he said, his pale blue eyes holding theirs. The man makes the tattoo mean something. All this, he pointed vaguely at the general, the uniforms, the soldiers. It comes and goes. But your character, son, that's the only thing you truly own. Try not to lose it. With that, he looked at his old friend. Buy me a coffee, Marcus. It's been a while. As General Brooks put a steadying hand on Frank's shoulder, a final quick image bloomed in Frank's mind. Not of the jungle, but of a quiet moment after. A makeshift aid station. A much younger Marcus Brooks, his arm bandaged, wincing as Frank himself, his hands steady, put the last touches to the fresh tattoo on the lieutenant's arm with that same bamboo needle. He remembered his own words from that day 50 years ago. It's a promise to remember the ones who aren't here and to never, ever quit. Now you're one of us, for life. The results from the incident at the Scrambled Egg were swift and decisive. General Brooks didn't just discipline Davis and Martinez. He saw a symptom of a larger disease, a generation of warriors who were so focused on the present that they had forgotten their past. Within a month, he started a new mandatory block of instruction for every single special operations candidate. It was called Legacy, and it was a deep dive into the history and lineage of their silent profession. The classes weren't taught by active duty instructors, but by a rotating roster of vetted veterans from Vietnam, Grenada, and Panama. Men like Frank Cooper, who were flown in to speak directly to the young candidates, to share their stories and teach the lessons that could only be learned through time and sacrifice. Davis and Martinez were not dishonorably discharged. General Brooks believed that would be too easy. Instead, they were reassigned. They became the permanent office staff for the new legacy program, responsible for arranging travel, setting up classrooms, and making sure the veteran speakers had everything they needed. For the next 3 years, their duty was to serve the very men they had once failed to respect. Forced to listen to the same stories of quiet, humble heroism day after day, it was a subtle but profound form of payback. About a year later, Frank was in a local hardware store looking for a specific type of bolt for his old lawnmower. He was walking down an aisle when a young man in a simple Army physical training uniform respectfully cleared his throat. It was Davis. He was leaner, the pride gone from his eyes, replaced by a quiet humility. "Sir," he began, his voice hesitant. "Mr. Cooper, I don't know if you remember me." "I remember," Frank said simply, his gaze steady. Davis swallowed hard. "I just wanted to say, what I did that day was unforgivable. There's no excuse. I was arrogant and I was wrong. I'm sorry for everything." There was no grand speech, no dramatic plea for forgiveness. It was just a simple, honest admission. Frank looked at him for a long moment, then extended his hand. Davis took it and was surprised by the strength in the old man's grip. "We all have things to learn, son," Frank said, his voice the same quiet rumble it always was. "The important thing is that you just keep learning." He gave a small nod, then turned back to the bin of bolts. The conversation for him already over. The quiet heroes walk among us every day. If you were moved by Frank Cooper's story of dignity and valor, please like this video, subscribe to our channel for more stories, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. We'll see you in the next one.